Well, hi, everyone. I'm Hailey Miller, and I serve as the Director of Government Relations and Public Policy at the Digital Power Network, the world's largest trade association for Bitcoin miners and digital infrastructure developers. Our mission is making sure that miners' voices are heard. That often work means translating between two worlds, miners on the ground building and innovating, and policymakers in Congress who are still learning what mining really is, which is why I'm thrilled to be joined today by Jayson Browder, Senior Vice President of Government Affairs and Social Responsibility at MARA, one of the largest and most engaged companies on Capitol Hill. Jayson has spent countless hours in the halls of Congress making the case for Bitcoin mining, and today we'll pull back the curtain on what that looks like. Jayson, let's start with your journey. As a senior executive in one of the largest public mining companies, you spent significant time engaging directly with policymakers. What motivated you personally and MARA as a company to lean into policy advocacy? And when you first began those conversations in DC, what has surprised you most about lawmakers' understanding or misunderstanding about Bitcoin mining?
Well, thanks. I'm happy to be here. Thanks to Lee, Steve, and the TBC for hosting this great event again, and to Hailey, Moderator, and DPN, ED. One, I'm a Bitcoiner, so tried and true, just love Bitcoin and the ethos behind it. And so that's what drove me into the space. Two, Fred Teal, our CEO of MARA, he was one of the first. I see Jayson Less in the background right there, Riot as well. Two of the first companies that actually had a vision for government relations. I think Brian was probably the first public policy hire that was like in our space within the Bitcoin mining space. I came right behind him over at MARA, and really a vision at a time when Bitcoin mining and the broader crypto industry in DC was really reeling. I mean, this is like SBF debacle. All the Democrats had gotten money from him at some point. They were trying to distance themselves away from crypto. I remember first conversations in the halls of Congress, one, educating them around like what Bitcoin was, what Bitcoin mining was. You know, they would come in and ask like, are you digging it out of the ground, was like literally questions that we would get on Capitol Hill. And also like, please leave our office because we don't want our constituents to think that like we're taking money from scammers. And so it's really been a whiplash. I'm sure we'll get into it. It's really been a whiplash from that experience to now what we have in Washington, D.C. But that's really been the journey and sort of the founding moments of policy for the industry.
So we've seen mining become a real flashpoint in Washington, whether it's the tax treatment, environmental debates, tariffs, supply chains, or even the idea of a strategic Bitcoin reserve. From your vantage point at MARA, what has been the most important policy wins so far, and what are the toughest challenges still ahead?
I think policy and politics come into this. I think from a politics standpoint, the presidency with President Trump being elected, also the Senate and the House, has been very positive for the industry. We can get into the whole laundry list of problems and issues that we had in the prior administration, from the seizing of our miners in the U.S. And so from a political standpoint, that has been sort of a watershed moment. From a policy standpoint, whether it's the stablecoin bill that recently was signed into law, whether it was market structure legislation that just passed in the House, whether it was the executive order on digital assets through SBR, whether it was the CAMT guidance that Treasury issued about 2 weeks ago, omitting Bitcoin from the minimum 15% tax on unrealized gains. I mean, it's really been win after win after win after win since the new administration has taken over. And the last thing I'll mention, personnel is policy and policy is personnel. There was no White House director for digital assets prior to the Trump administration. So just being able to hire and have someone as a point of contact, Bo Hines, who of course now has gone to Tether, but now Patrick Witt as the executive director of the Crypto Council. When we had our miners seized towards the end of the administration, we really had no one at the White House to go to and say, what is going on? Why are our miners being seized? What is the government doing? What are ways that we can work with, DHS, CBP, to get our miners out or equipment? And now we have someone to go to speak to about these critical policy issues that not only affect Bitcoin miners, but just the broader digital asset space. And I would say the same thing in both the House and Senate. You always have had digital asset champions as like individuals. So people think of like Senator Lummis or Representative Begich. But now you have chairs of these committees that are also advocates on our industry's behalf. So you look at Chairman French Hill in the House and Chairman Scott in the Senate, who've been very supportive of making sure that real legislation is being developed in these committees that affect us, and that they are getting passed in a bipartisan matter, because that's obviously the only way that things get done in Washington, D.C.
One of the things we work on at the Digital Power Network is really helping policymakers understand what makes miners different from other players in the digital asset space. Can you hear me now? Okay.
Yes.
One of the things we work on at the Digital Power Network is helping policymakers understand what makes miners different from other players in the digital asset space. When you sit down with a member of Congress or a staffer, what are the arguments that are actually landing? What breaks through the headlines and helps policymakers understand the real role that miners are playing? Is it the energy markets conversation? Is it job creation? Is it innovation? What's really landing?
So, yeah, that's a great question. Public officials are always going to care about projects that are happening in your district. So that's something to keep in mind. They're always looking for wins that they can go back home and say, hey, we're getting more jobs. We're, having investments, increasing community development issues. But I think the things that really stick around the energy and infrastructure piece, that's something they get more than, blockchain or DeFi protocols, real investments around whether it's data centers. And then also there's a lot of talk about like how much energy we need to invest. And the things that miners in particular hit home on is obviously being a baseload that's flexible. That's a really valuable conversation to them. Also on monetizing stranded assets and renewable energy assets. Obviously in Texas, there's been a huge buildup in renewable projects. A lot of those subsidies are gone. So miners being able to co-locate or behind the meter at wind farms, solar farms is something that they care a lot about. And so I would say energy markets, energy development, energy infrastructure is key talking points that most members understand and want to get behind.
Who would you say are your biggest champions right now in Congress for Bitcoin? Has that changed recently in the last coming months? Are you starting to see more members of Congress who understand the issues and are supportive of the issues?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I mentioned earlier, like, you would kind of get kicked out of offices around when we first started advocating for policy and legislation, given the backdrop of SBF. And also there was an education gap. DPN, TBC, other trade organizations has done a really great job of educating members on these critical issues. And also it is actually bipartisan. And I continue to sort of, beat the horn or the drum, however you say it, with our peers, with trades on ensuring that it continues to be bipartisan. So you have your Richie Torreses from New York, who's been a supporter. You have your Jim Hines from Connecticut, who's been a supporter. These are Democrats. And then you obviously have your Bitcoin champions, whether it's Senator Lummis, Representative Begich. Also, I think it's we just hosted the Speaker of the House. I'm going to give a plug real quick to the Bitcoin Voter Project, which is a C4 and C6 that we developed with CleanSpark and Riot to educate voters and then to mobilize them to vote in elections, local, state, and federal. And we hosted Speaker Mike Johnson just last month. If you would have told me that we would be with the Speaker of the House, the third most powerful public official in the United States, and that he would be talking about Bitcoin and Bitcoin mining, it just like blow you away. And so it's not only just individual members, it's leadership throughout the federal government. I mean, Secretary of Treasury is retweeting Campty. He's retweeting Senator Lummis's Campty tweet while he's doing like trade deals with China and tariffs and everything. I mean, it's just, I get whiplash sometimes to think about like how far we've come in such a short space. But you have cabinet level members, Secretary Lutnick talking about the strategic Bitcoin reserve, the Secretary of Commerce. It's like crazy, but it's a lot of seeds that we've planted throughout the years that have finally are growing, are bearing fruit for our industry.
Mara's been at the table consistently, and you've seen firsthand how much this industry has changed. From your perspective, how important has coalition building been in advancing industry goals? And what advice would you give to other operators who might not yet be in DC speaking with policymakers or the administration?
Yeah, this is something that's also been a long time in the making, and really led by, I would say, Brian Morgenstern, who's my counterpart, Margot over at CleanSpark. A lot of industries do this. So obviously, we're publicly traded companies. We compete against each other. We're trying to outperform everyone else. But when it comes to policy, advocacy, and legislation, large companies who have been doing this for multiple decades understand the importance of coalition building when it comes to getting legislation and policies passed that are supportive to the growth. So whether it's like the Railroad Association or the Bankers Association, which is like one of the most incredible lobbying operations that exist in the U.S. You wonder why like certain legislation passes, and it's because these companies join together to advocate for positive policies that will affect their industry. And we need more of that in the Bitcoin mining, digital asset space. That is how we're going to continue to have political wins that will eventually turn into policy wins. Like Campty, I think, is a great example of this. There are certain areas like the de minimis tax that we're currently working on now in Congress. And so having not just the miners, but companies like Block and Square, see Will over there in the audience, that are joining together that, people might say on the outside, like, why is Block and why is a Bitcoin miner joining forces for this? But it helps the whole ecosystem. And at the end of the day, we want to support Bitcoiners, at least I do. And so it's incredibly important that we join forces in Washington, D.C., and then, of course, in the state capitals across the country.
Now, looking ahead, there are some very big policy questions coming. Over the next few years, we're going to look at major decisions that could shape the history of Bitcoin mining, from energy innovation and grid integration, supply chain incentives, to whether the U.S. should even hold Bitcoin on their reserves. From your perspective at Mara, what's the single biggest policy battle that's coming forward for us, and how will the U.S. compare globally if we don't get it right?
That's a very good question, very interesting question. I could go down many routes because there's a lot of things that I think are critical to Bitcoin, the Bitcoin network, and then obviously our companies. I think the strategic Bitcoin reserve that was introduced by Senator Lummis in the Senate, and then Representative Begich from Alaska in the House, I think that's critical legislation if you look at just geopolitics, the U.S. being the Bitcoin superpower of the world. You saw the executive order when President Trump first took office that describes, in theory, what an SBR is. It singles out Bitcoin versus all other crypto assets, not crapping on anything else. But as the premier asset for a strategic reserve, the SBR goes further, which says the government should actually purchase Bitcoin for the strategic reserve. It is something that we were on Capitol Hill just last month with Michael Saylor and others, because SBR is sort of third in line in sort of legislative priorities within the Senate and the House. The first was stablecoin for obvious reasons. Market structure is next in the queue. And then the SBR is sort of a close third. And so I think for us, it's ensuring that we're supportive of market structure legislation, even though it doesn't directly affect miners specifically. We do think the market structure bill will bring more capital into the market, which will obviously be supportive of Bitcoin miners. And then obviously, Mars is the second largest holder of Bitcoin. We have like over 53 or $54,000 or 53,000 Bitcoin on our balance sheet. But the SBR, I think, is something that, if we get right, really sets the U.S. apart from any other country when it comes to being the Bitcoin superpower of the world.
Bitcoin policy is constantly fighting for airtime when it comes to Congress in the digital asset space. What do you do, or as personally and as a company, to help advocate those policy issues? Or what can the folks in this room do to help really bring the voice to Congress that Bitcoin policy is a priority and should continue to be so?
The first thing to do is to contact your member of Congress. One of my first jobs out of the military was working for a U.S. senator in constituent affairs. And literally what you do is just answer calls from people in the community with like whatever the issue is. It could be with like the postal service because their mail isn't getting delivered, or it could be for like veteran affairs. There's literally a tally board that every member of Congress has. And at the end of the day, the member of Congress comes and says, give me the top 3 or 4 issues that people called in about. And that's how a lot of members of Congress try to figure out, engage sentiment on like what is important to their members. And you might have 10 people call in and 8 be about, one specific issue. And that's influence. And as Bitcoiners and people in the space, like the first thing you should be doing is your state representative or your federal representative and calling into the office, sending an email and just saying, I really care about the SBR bill. And they're going to put it on a tally, and then they're going to go to the center and say, 30 people called in about SBR. And the senator might go, what the hell is that? Right? And that starts an education process for that member of Congress, if they don't sit on the Senate Finance Committee or whatever else, to say, can you go figure out what this SBR bill is with Senator Lummis and Begich? Come back, tell me if it's good or if it's bad or whatever else. The second thing is actually going in person. And so DPN does this very well, the Digital Chamber, other trades, which is to bring constituents in to meet with their member offices in person and to sit down and to talk with them. So one's calling in the office. The second, it's coming to the Hill or to the Texas State Legislature and talking. And then the third is voting. Obviously, that's really important to do. Vote for people that you think you have your best interests at heart. Stop voting for members of Congress that continue to screw your interest. I don't know why people don't do that, but like they continue to like send someone up to Congress, continues to screw them. And then the fourth issue, or the fourth recommendation I would give, is also to like support organizations that are leading the effort. So I mentioned Bitcoin Voter Project in particular, BVP. Please go look it up. I mentioned C4, grassroots education development, but we're also supporting members, state and federal that have your best interests at heart when it comes to things that you care about within the Bitcoin space or the digital asset space. So that would be my recommendations.
And as we get closer to time, if you could leave this audience with one takeaway about why engaging in Washington matters, what would it be?
Again, I think people don't realize that like you have a voice and that your voice is actually counted. I think people kind of think like, oh, Washington's happening sort of in the ether somewhere, and I really don't have any way that I can influence members. And I tell you, it's like the complete opposite. And actually, when you see like policies you don't agree with and you're like, I don't know why like we passed this policy, it seems really dumb. It's because like literally 40 people that are like avid about this issue keep calling their member of Congress and being like, you need to pass the, I don't know what it is, like the food, whatever. And they're like, we got to do this because these 40 people like won't leave me alone. And so as like Bitcoiners and people that care about the space, we have to be more active and more engaged in the policy front. And again, it's super, 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 super simple. Just like pick up the phone, go to Google, look up who your member is, and just call them and say, I care about Bitcoin. And if you don't care about Bitcoin or Bitcoin mining or digital assets, and you don't vote for it when it comes up, I'm going to remember that at your election. And I promise you, they'll be thinking about it. And if your 5 friends do it and your 6 friends do it, then they're really going to think about it. And we have a lot of power and a lot of momentum that we've built up the last 2 years. It's now time to flex and use that. So I encourage everyone to join forces. Thanks.
Jayson, thank you for sharing your insights and for giving us an inside look at what it's really like to make the case for Bitcoin mining in Washington. These are the kind of conversations that are going to shape how the industry moves forward, not just in DC, but across the country. Thank you, everyone.